We've all heard of net zero, this project, this ambitious plan to get to the point where man's activities are no longer adding to concentrations of atmospheric carbon dioxide, anthropogenic CO2. We're told that the survival of the planet depends on it. And we're told, or not so much told directly, but politicians, if you just kind of read their body language and the way they say these things, it seems like it's an easy thing. We'll just transition by 2030. It'll be no problem. It'll be no challenge at all. We'll just have more windmills and more solar farms and more batteries and maybe a bit of pumped hydro along the way, and all of a sudden, hey presto, we'll be at net zero in less than a decade's time. Well, if only it were that easy, if only such massive changes could be done on a dime. Sadly, they can't. My next guest, Simon Michaux, is someone who actually has done the research to show just how gargantuan such a transition is going to be. He's not a man who's particularly popular amongst the political set because, well, he's grounded in reality and they are grounded in politics. Simon Michaux, thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Now, you've actually spent considerable time in Australia. Before we get to the topic at hand, are you from Australia originally? You're in Helsinki right now. We're talking to you across the world. What's your background?
Right, so I was born and raised in Brisbane,
Lovely. Beautiful
to
part of the world.
western suburbs.
S-
So my basic degree is physics and geology
mhm,
at the University of UT.
mhm.
Then I went on and did some mining geology and geostatistics in a master's set, and then a PhD in mining engineering explosives.
So you went from living in one of the warmer cities of one of the warmest continents on the planet, and now you're in Helsinki. Is that
Correct.
is that a step forward, or have you made a mistake in your life and you've ended up relegated to the cold?
Not at all, not at all. As for the cold, everything in Helsinki is heated. All
Ah,
buildings are engineered for the cold. I'm actually much more comfortable here
hmm.
than in Australia, right?
Interesting.
Because we don't get cold in winter
That'll
at
that
all.
that'll be a very interesting point to bring up a little bit later in the conversation. Now,
Mm.
Simon, you're best known for your absolutely gripping work, and I want to read the title of this video here. I apologize, I have to look off camera to read it because it's so long I cannot possibly remember it. This is a video from
Sorry.
11 months ago. Catchy title: The Assessment of the Extra Capacity Required of Alternative Energy Electrical Power Systems to Completely Replace Fossil Fuels. I'm actually going to put the link to that video in the description of this video because it is actually exceptional. It's an incredible lecture that you did, incredibly well researched and referenced. You put all the data on the screen. Can you tell us what is the thesis? What is it? What is it? What is your message? What are you about?
So I used to be in the Australian mining industry for about 18 years in both academia and the private sector, very briefly. And I was collecting information to show that the mining industry was struggling to actually hit targets. Right. And then I came to Europe to learn industrial recycling and mineral intelligence and the circular economy. And when I came to Europe, I found that there was complete lack of these very senior meetings for the European Commission,
Mm,
in a research project called the H2020, which is now Horizon Europe. And there was no feasibility plan. There was no feasibility study of we are now going to phase out fossil fuels. And
right.
what I was hoping to see is a plan that says we will now make a new plan, X number of power stations of this kind over there, operated
Mm,
by these people with this
mm,
infrastructure.
mm.
Uh, None of that. There was none of that. They couldn't even tell me the size of the global transport fleet. And if they
Wow.
don't know that, how are they going to determine the number of electric vehicles they think they're going to make?
Hmm.
Now, down the corridor, the people who are in charge and dictating terms to the policymakers that I was in contact with, excuse me, they were under the influence of, say, the managers of banking hedge funds,
Right.
right? And their mandate was growth. And it was all about money and profit. And we
Hmm.
must grow,
Hmm.
grow, 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 grow. We will see more complexity, more stuff, more consumerism. We're going to make a lot of money. We'll be very rich. Thank you very much.
Mm.
Right. That's and so the whole mandate for the previous 20 years of work for me was showing that we are about to go into that very difficult phase that was predicted by the Club of Rome in 1972, where um, society changes and it comes down to uh, what you might call limits to growth of resource materials
Sure.
being extracted. So while I could understand that abstract concept, right, it was useless. You're not going to convince anyone with such an abstract idea. What was needed and what was missing was some hard numbers. There were a lack of numbers in all directions. And so what was needed was how many power stations, how many electric vehicles, what are we looking at here? And so I set about to map the existing system at the moment, because even basic things like what do fossil fuels do for us now?
Sure.
And it's become so ubiquitous. It's in the background. It's like the oxygen we breathe in the air. It's so there all the time. We don't even see it anymore. Well, energy is like that, right? Petroleum in particular is in everything. Everything. We're a petroleum-driven society, even now. And so there was a general lack of understanding of what fossil fuels was actually doing for us and how dependent on it we were. And there was even a massive lack of understanding of the fact that we consume minerals from the mining industry. And in Europe in particular, we don't do any mining at all.
Wow.
Right. We buy metal off the market. We buy finished goods off the market. Mining happens somewhere else and it's considered dirty, unclean, and unenvironmental. How dare you suggest we're going to do more mining? And that's the general feel here. And so I actually want to sort of go out there and put some numbers on the ground to actually show, well, first of all, what do fossil fuels do for us now? A lot. Second of all, if we were to phase out fossil fuels, what would it take? What are we talking about? What are the tasks? And how big are they? And and then the final follow-up question was, if we were to source the amount of metal that we need to produce all this, what amount of metal will we need and where will we get it from? So I used to be part of the recycling world as well. And so promises are being made on behalf of the recycling industry that they're not going to be able to deliver on at scale. It works just fine at a small scale, but you try scaling it up. That's when the bottlenecks happen. So this study is not rocket science. I used mathematics I learned when I was 13 years old. Anyone can do it. It's a very simple formula. I could tell you the formula right now, and you could go off and repeat it.
And I still wouldn't understand it.
Well, it's when you get to the so I think you would. It's actually very simple, brutally simple. It doesn't include everything.
Sure.
It shows a basic idea, and it's highlighted 2 or 3 fairly serious blind spots in our industrial planning.
And what are they?
Okay, so first of all, we have fundamentally misunderstood the commodities industry. Right? Until now, technology development has happened as a thing, like technology develops in a cycle of, say, 2 to 4 years. Right. And when the demand's there, or someone comes up with a cool idea, get it out to market, and everyone wants it, and then that's the development.
Sure.
Right. Whereas a mine takes about 7 or 8 years to explore and discover and get to a feasibility study, then about 15 years to go from a deposit that's been discovered to a producing mine, maybe 20 years. Right. And then you've actually sort of get to the point where you're actually producing saleable minerals that will come out of that. And so the commodities industry happens in a cycle of around 20, 25 years.
Sure.
Right. And you can't just snap your fingers and magic up more commodities.
Sure.
But there's a general feeling, for example, because for the last 50 years, we've used ideology to solve all our problems in one form or another. And 50 years ago, it was, if we want to balance our budget, we just print more money. We can invent cash out of the air, right? And we could throw money at things. And so that this is the problem that we are dealing with. So now you've got the feeling where if there is a scarcity of something, the price goes up. And when the price goes up, that will make it more relevant, more economic to go and explore more resources that before aren't economic. Therefore, more production's brought online. Therefore, the scarcity goes away, right? But that's assuming that there is an infinite amount of resources.
Sure.
Now, we're not going to run out of resources, right? Because, the entire Andes mountain range, for example, is one big giant copper deposit.
Yeah.
And a good one's lithium. There's lithium in seawater. Okay, great.
Sure.
Right. But our ability to extract that lithium
is a
and
challenge.
The technology associated with that is, there is a viability there. Is it worthwhile? And it's not an economic problem. It's actually an energy problem.
So
And so you've got an energy feedback loop.
for the layperson that hasn't really encountered any of these ideas before, can you paint a bit of a picture? How big is the task ahead if we were to transition away from fossil fuels entirely? Just how much mining would we have to do to provide the copper, the lithium, the cobalt, and all of the other bits and bobs out of the ground? How big of a problem
Okay,
is
so
this?
let me pull up the chart.
Sure.
Okay, so what I've got here is for a start, I mapped out that there's this 1.41 billion vehicles in the global transport fleet in 2018.
Okay.
Now that's a rough estimate, and it's a low estimate. The real number is probably 1.6
Okay.
because it was hard to get information. But let's take the 1.4, and we consumed 26,614 terawatt hours of electrical power across that year, right?
Okay.
And of which a small proportion was non-fossil fuel.
Sure.
Most of it was fossil fuel, oil, gas, and coal. So we've got to replace that. Now, just to do a straight replacement of that system, to go from to replace the system what we have around us now, we're going to need something like 195 years of. Let's take the mining industry as it was in 2019, the year before COVID.
Okay.
So the last year of sensible data.
Yep.
So if we use that mining rate, how many years of production will we need to produce the amount of materials that we need to replace what we have now? And so now I've got 195 years of copper production,
Goodness.
413 years of nickel production, 10,258 years of lithium production, 1,790 years of cobalt production, 6,778 years for graphite production, and so on. There's a few of them, right? And so what's happening there is we are a petroleum-driven society.
Yeah.
Everything's run by cars.
Yeah.
Cars and trucks driving around. To take your average car or truck, for that matter, most of it is iron, steel with a bit of magnesium.
Sure.
And a little bit of copper, aluminium to make all the shell and everything, and a little bit of copper, and that's it. To rip that out and replace it with, say, an electric vehicle system, now you've got exotic elements like lithium and cobalt and rare earths. Now, they're all elements that we do have now, but we mine them in trace elements.
Right.
Usually when you, for example, let's say you want the element indium, which is used in electronics. To get indium, you actually have to pull it out as a trace element from zinc concentrate. So you've got to mine zinc first, and then get it in the concentrate out. And so it's a specialist, boutique, small market.
Sure.
Right, but to replace this technology that's so ubiquitous now, we now need lots and lots of this stuff, and so we're going to take elements that are relatively small trace element volumes now, and we want to mine them like copper and steel. And so that's. And then, so if we were to actually force the existing mining industry to ramp up, we're talking like several %,000% expansion. And the information I've got is the mining industry is not going to be able to do that.
So can I just make sure I'm understanding you correctly? If I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is that in order to achieve what our politicians, our political class are saying we're going to do by 2030 or maybe 2050, in 5 to 25 years' time, we will have achieved an increase in our mining capacity of a factor of orders of magnitude in how much we can mine. We then also have to be able to process that, manufacture that, distribute that, get it out to where it's actually going to be used. And that's in the context, as you pointed out earlier, of a commodities industry where it could take 25 years just for a new mine to come online, much less for the entire process to unfold.
Yeah, correct. So the first bottleneck we hit is actually not mining. It's the ability to smelt and refine metal and then produce it into something useful.
Yeah.
Now, 50, 60 years ago, every continent had roughly the same capacity in terms of production and smelting. But now all of that's been cleaned out and it's been concentrated into one area, Southeast Asia, China in particular.
Sure.
Right. Now, so we don't have these systems anymore. So we've got a number of problems. We've got our financial systems are degrading hard. We've got an energy problem where our existing energy systems now are becoming much more expensive and unreliable. Right. And so our idea now is to transition to a new system, but we've wiped out our ability to do any industrial services. So we're dependent on a market-based environment with a country that we don't like and we like to economically sanction, and we are now just lining up a large-scale conflict.
Yeah.
So it's is it flamboyantly stupid, or did they mean it?
Well, that's the $1,000,000 question. But Simon, you've painted a really grim picture when it comes to this green energy revolution. As I said before, I'm going to put the link to this video. I've got it up in front of me on the laptop here, this incredible presentation that you did that really spells it out. How is it, given that the data is so clear, how is it that our politicians can grandstand and make these promises and get away with it?
Let's see. So we're back to ideology, I think. We solve our problems with ideology. If we make a statement, it's true. Therefore, we can ignore the negative things. I found personally, for example, when I actually talk to people around me, and when I present stuff, there is a very significant pressure, and it's a self-censorship of not to say anything negative.
Right.
And they say, when you go on stage, don't say anything negative.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in Australia. I've seen it in Europe. I've seen it in the United States.
Yeah.
Right. So we tend to, anything that might suggest that it's going to cost money, or, our markets might not be so good, or we won't make so much, there might be a bit more unemployment. No, shut your mouth. Don't say anything like that. We don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a general, and so when there's a fundamental problem that's been there, invisible all along, it's like rising like a tide, we refuse to see it. You remember that movie, Don't Look Up?
Haven't
it's actually
seen
a very
it,
clever,
gotta be honest.
It's a very clever satire.
Right.
An asteroid is approaching Earth and it's going to hit Earth, and they find it, and the response of politicians is to have a PR campaigns that don't look up.
I've got to watch it now. I had no idea.
It's actually very, very funny.
Yeah.
But it's transferable to any of the macro scale challenges that we face at the moment. And even in the environmental crises that we are facing at the moment, I think they've got the wrong end of the stick in terms of they're focusing on the wrong thing.
Okay.
And so we're flogging ourselves chasing something that in the end I think is actually not going to be that meaningful.
Well, Simon, that actually sounds like a conversation I'd very much love to have with you, but it's outside of the scope of the Aussie Wire because we've gone well over the 7-minute target. I've loved this conversation.
Oh, shit. Sorry. No, I didn't realize that.
This has been actually really, really thought-provoking. There is an enormous amount of depth to your work. I know that from watching your videos, and I can see it again in this conversation that we've had. So I'm going to call time for today, but Simon, I would love to schedule a longer chat, a slow chat with you at some point in time. But for today, Simon, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Okay, so you're welcome.